And we're back in the car on a Friday, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Friday morning into afternoon here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, 39 years ago today, on May 23rd, 1986, at least I think today's the 23rd, I'm pretty sure it is, 1986, it saw the release of maybe the ultimate guilty pleasure movie, a film which is demonstrably terrible. Objectively speaking, it is a trashy, just a absolute ridicularity. It's a lousy movie. There's no attempt at any character development. There's no attempt at having a plot which makes any sense. The story seems to be one thing and then it goes in another direction. It is all over the map. It's a cop thriller that's not really a cop thriller. It's a Stallone underdog makes good story. That it really is. It's a showcase for Stallone's then wife Brigitte Nielsen to look hot in various outfits, and for Sly, who's already, as we know, has a deep voice to begin with, even as a very young man had a deep voice. Well, because he doesn't want this character to sound like John Rambo or Robert Rocky Balboa.
He lowers his voice another octave or two. Hey, they've got somebody on the inside.
He speaks most of his lines in a very low growl. He looks great, though. Physically, he looks tremendous. You know, he's muscular, he's cut. He wears some pretty cool outfits. He wears some pants that wouldn't fly today. They're a little bit too tight for comfort. I don't know what he was thinking there. But on this day, 1986, George Pan Cosmatos, who had directed Rambo First Blood Part 2, so he and Stallone had a good working relationship on that film, which I think is not very good either, if we're being honest. But Cobra opened in theaters. And history tells us, if we just look at the numbers, the box office numbers, Cobra was successful. But given the runaway success of Rambo First Blood Part 2, screenplay written by James Cameron. A little bit of trivia in case you get asked at a bar, but yes, James Cameron wrote the screenplay for Rambo First Blood Part 2, which was just a spectacular, staggering box office hit. I've never been able to figure out why. The first one, which I also don't really love, The First Blood is demonstrably a better movie than Rambo First Blood Part 2, but what are you going to do? So it actually is a pretty involved, and I know, and this is not me making jokes, but many of you have pointed out that you liked when I'm able to do a real deep dive and not just give you my thoughts on a film, but how a film came into being. And of recent vintage, the episode on the Godzilla movie, a lot of laughs, and the people indicated they enjoyed the kind of behind the scenes of the movie and how there were certain characters in that film that only make sense to people of a certain age or who were alive when Siskel and Ebert were on TV, for example. The Die Hard with a Vengeance episode, the fact that there was such a long and torturous process just getting a script that was usable for Die Hard 3. Well, Cobra did not start out as Cobra. This was not a similar project where Stallone maybe got on board and they knew exactly what they were doing when they were doing it. The Cobra project began with Beverly Hills Cop. And at a certain point, circa 1982, Stallone was branching out. He showed off his directing chops with, it's not really that good, the sequel to Saturday Night Fever with, his good friend John Travolta. And he thought he was going to be a musician. The movie Rhinestone with Dolly Parton, like he was making a lot of interesting choices in that part of the decade. One of my favorite Stallone films of any kind, Victory from '81, working with Sir Michael Caine and Pele and the phenomenal filmmaker John Huston, Angelica's dad. But Sly wanted to do another cop thriller after the success of Nighthawks, a very interesting film. It's a New York set cop thriller that doesn't do at all what we think it's going to, given the fact that it's Sly in the central character. We had the beard and the hair of the era and all of that kind of stuff, the glasses. But Stallone wanted to do a more straightforward cop thriller, and maybe a cop thriller that had a couple of laughs here or there, because Nighthawks ain't very funny. There's no room for humor at all in that film, if you ask me. I didn't remember laughing once. So Hollywood was kicking around a project which would become Beverly Hills Cop. And I don't know if it was called Beverly Hills Cop, but in about 1982, I think while he was shooting Rhinestone, or maybe he had just finished Principal on that, again, the mechanics of this, we would know this now for sure, but back then, this wasn't all reported in real time. So Stallone got his hands on Beverly Hills, what became Beverly Hills Cop. And, the studio, I guess it was Paramount. It was Paramount. They were excited because Sly was still hot. Of course, Rocky winning the Oscar for screenplay. And not screenplay, what am I talking about? It won for Best Picture. Stallone had a lot of heat around him. He was nominated for Best Actor and Best Screenplay. I don't know that it won screenplay. It should have, but maybe it didn't. But the success of Rocky II from the box office perspective, and already the success of First Blood, Stallone's career was still elevated. And he's still a very young man. He's 36, maybe he's 35, 36. He's in that range at this point in time. So he gets a copy of Beverly Hills Cop. And what he's told is the studio likes the juxtaposition of the kind of blue collar, I know this is a cliche, but the sort of blue collar lunch pail police officer who suddenly goes to this super fancy bougie, to use a word a lot of the kids today like, but to just all of a sudden be dropped into this multi-millionaire coke den. And I don't mean drinking, I mean cocaine. And how is that going to play out with this tough inner city, in this case Detroit, police officer suddenly transplanted to Beverly Hills to try to solve murder, crimes, whatever it was? But Paramount, the powers that be, I don't know who was running the studio, because Stallone was already at the level where he would not be meeting with low-level executives. He would be meeting with the big hitters of the company and the era. It wasn't Ron Meyer. Ron Meyer, I think, was at Universal. But we're talking about somebody at the top level of the business, a Steve Ross, someone in that ballpark. But Ross was at Warner. It's funny, I know a lot of names, but I don't know all of the names. I just never learned it, I guess. But they tell Stallone, they're very specific. We like the fish out of water element, yes. We like the fact that it has elements of the buddy film, and we like the fact that this is funny. This is an action comedy or a comedy action. This is not a straightforward action thriller. And maybe they didn't use that exact terminology, but this is what Stallone gets from them. He reads the script and he's interested, and he says, I'd like to get involved. They are over the moon. Wow, this is great. We're going to cast, we're going to do a great job. We'll let you work with us to figure out who you want to be your co-stars, the two other cops. And everybody is excited. And Stallone says, because the thing with Stallone, he is incredibly restless. He is, and this is not a criticism, he is a control freak, and he wants to have as much as possible his fingerprints across any film that he might be involved with, whether it's now, whether it's then. And I'm sure he has a lot of input, for example, on the TV show Tulsa King. That is not a criticism. He knows what he wants to do, what kind of heroes he's comfortable playing, all this stuff. It's all true, and it is not a knock on that guy at all. So Stallone reads the script and goes back to the guys at Paramount and said, okay, I'm in, but can I take a whack at the script? I'd like to submit another pass to you. I have some ideas, if that's okay. And the way that Stallone explains himself, he's not going to sign, in the immortal words of Alec Baldwin and Glenn Ross, he is not going to sign on the line that is dotted without doing his own pass at the screenplay. Write his own version of the script. He's not going to change that much, presumably, but he had some thoughts what he wanted to do. And Stallone had read this book by an author by the name of Paula Gosling called Fair Game. And his pass at Beverly Hills Cop, I guess he used some elements from that book. I don't know how, because I'm familiar with the book, but he must have used some elements from that book. We'll get to that. Stallone finishes the draft. Didn't take him long, a couple of weeks. A guy like that, once he gets going, he wrote the original Rocky in less than a week. He just ripped through it. So he submits his version of the screenplay. He says, this is what I would like to do, guys. What do you think? And they don't like what he came up with. Because what Stallone did, not surprisingly, he amped up the action elements. He amped up the violence elements. And he, to a large extent, took out the comedic bits. And they had been very clear with him, not in a nasty way, but they told him one reason they latched onto this and thought that it would play is because it was different for a cop thriller. Lethal Weapon hadn't happened yet. 48 Hours maybe wasn't quite out. That I'm not sure of. But 48 Hours is very serious. When people say that that's a comedy, no, it's not. It is way more serious than what Beverly Hills Cop became. So Stallone submitted, and the studio said, we don't like this, Sly. We love you. We want you to do the script that we gave you. We think it's going to work with you because you haven't done comedy, and we know you can be funny. That's the thing. Not all the time. It doesn't always translate. Sylvester Stallone has a great sense of humor. He really is a funny guy, to quote Ray Liotta from Goodfellas. But it didn't translate in the movies that he made up to that point. And they said, no, you can do this. You don't need all of this violence and bloodshed. It's what he wanted to do. So Stallone, gracefully and gratefully that they allowed him the opportunity to take a crack at that script, he bowed out of the project. And so history is thankful that Stallone bowed out very quietly, and at the time very few people knew any of this because it just wasn't, these things weren't reported. Maybe it was a buried item in the Hollywood Reporter or Daily Variety, but it was not like a big news story back then. So Stallone liked that script. He really liked the script, the Beverly Hills Cobra, if you will, script that he came up with. It wasn't called that at the time. And he wanted to make a movie that used certain elements from that. And remember how I mentioned there was this book by Paula Gosling called Fair Game, and there were certain things in that book that he latched onto, and that is what became Cobra. Stallone continued to tailor his work on what was supposed to be Beverly Hills Cop, and he took out the stuff where the cop being transplanted from one area in the United States, inner city, to the kind of wealthy area. We'll just have it that this guy is just a cop in LA. He's just there. It's not going to be Beverly Hills. It's just going to be a cop in LA. And there were certain elements of the book Fair Game dealing with a witness being protected by a lone police officer. Does any of this sound familiar? Because in 1995, the least controversial Baldwin brother, I mentioned Alec, the least controversial Baldwin brother, that would be William or Billy, starred in a movie with world supermodel #1, and somebody that I love because she's fucking awesome, as opposed to just as a personality. She's been in the public eye more than 3 decades, Cindy Crawford. They made an action thriller about a woman, a lawyer in the world of the movie, who is about to be assassinated by a bunch of nefarious bad guys. I think they're Russian expats in the book, and in the world of the movie, Billy Baldwin has to protect her long enough to figure out what's going on. And the movie was called what? The movie was called Fair Game. That was a direct adaptation of Paula Gosling's novel. Cobra has a lot of the same elements, but it is not a direct adaptation of Gosling's novel. But Stallone used enough of it. He didn't want anyone saying plagiarism or any of that. He used enough to form the core of his now complete renegade version of what became Beverly Hills Cop as Cobra. But her name is in the credits, and it is just an amazing irony that a pretty random, non-best-selling book by an author who was not that well known. She had one other book that sold better than Fair Game, but it was adapted twice within a decade. That is not something that Hollywood does very often, adapting the same book twice and making essentially the same movie, just with different actors and actresses, and a little bit of the details different. So when Stallone got the script together, and he wanted to work with George Pan Cosmatos again, and for reference, George Pan Cosmatos is an interesting figure because he made a lot of bad movies, but he was a talented visual stylist. There's a lot of beautiful shots throughout his filmography. I would argue that Rambo First Blood Part 2 is one of his weaker films, but his direction of Cobra is very, very solid. He did Tombstone. That's where I was going with that. In Tombstone, many people, because of Val Kilmer, it's on their list of certainly all-time favorite Westerns. And his direction there is very tight. The editing is well done. He's also in that film not afraid to get bloody. But when Stallone started to get what became Cobra ready, and obviously there's a big difference between a name Axel Foley and Marion Cobretti. That's the name of Stallone's character in Cobra. He is not called Cobra necessarily because of his tendencies to strike like a cobra. They don't really get into any of that, although he does have a gun that has the imprimatur of a cobra on it. That is not a coincidence. He is simply called Cobra because his last name is Cobretti. And I mentioned the other day that when you have to use a funny name or a name to make a point, it's typically not a good sign. I think that it works in this movie. I don't believe that Roger Ebert ever wrote a review on Cobra. I'm kind of glad, because my guess is he would have given it like a half a star or 1 star. I don't think it would have been to Roger's taste. But they got a very interesting cast together for Cobra. And it has the form, like there's a lot of different movies going on at the same time. It doesn't exactly fulfill the requirements of any one genre, because there are elements of the serial killer film. This movie has what amounts to a gang, a band of serial killers known as what? If you're a wrestling fan, you have to see this movie for no other reason than that the gang of serial killers is known as the New World Order. And I like to think that when Hulk Hogan in 1996 was getting ready to be the third man, Hulk Hogan is the third man. And when Hulk Hogan, the legend, was getting ready to form a new world order of wrestling, brother, he had seen Cobra, and that's where he got the idea, brother. Now, there's no way to confirm that. I don't know that Hulk ever actually said I was a big fan of Cobra. But yeah, the New World Order, that's what the clan of serial killers is known as. So you have elements of a serial killer film. You have elements of a standard cop thriller. And then you have a buddy film, kind of. And you have a woman on the run situation, kind of. It's all... It all doesn't quite coalesce. It doesn't quite coalesce. But the movie is magnificently entertaining nevertheless. Because Stallone's character, we don't really get to learn anything about him. We learn even less about Marion Cobretti than we learn of Harry Callahan in Dirty Harry. And this very clearly, to me, this is Stallone's interpretation of Dirty Harry. Now, Sly has long talked about his appreciation for Clint. And it's one of the things that, there are things in Hollywood that don't necessarily make sense, because you just don't know when two people meet and are on friendly terms. Why is it that certain people become best of friends and other people are just friendly acquaintances? Well, one of the things that is difficult to explain, Arnold Schwarzenegger has been and is close with both Clint Eastwood and Sylvester Stallone, and Stallone. For whatever reason, Arnold and Stallone have always been on friendly terms, but they've never been real close friends. Although Stallone has talked a lot about how much he loves Clint and his career, and he tried to get him. He said when he was preparing the Untouchable circa 2007 and 8 era, Clint was the first person he asked to get involved. He was really busy in that era and ended up, they didn't work together, so they never worked together. Cobra is Stallone's interpretation of the original Dirty Harry, where you have a lone cop serial killer, or in the world of Cobra, it's a gang of serial killers, whereas in the original Dirty Harry, it's just one guy who goes by Scorpio. It was supposed to be Zodiac. That was not an accident. And you have one guy trying to save the day. It is not accidental that two main components, main actors in the original Dirty Harry, Rennie Santoni and Andrew Robinson, they both played pivotal roles in the original Dirty Harry, have important roles in Cobra. Stallone did that because he knew people were going to be comparing, 15 years after Dirty Harry, they were going to be comparing Cobra. He hoped favorably. Not really. It didn't work out that way. But he knew people were going to be comparing the films anyway, so he figured, rather than pretend that this isn't the case, I bring it on, no problem. So the character played by Rennie Santoni in Dirty Harry is Chico Gonzalez. He is Clint Eastwood's partner throughout the film. That's who Clint's Harry Callahan winds up working with, and it's a great role and a terrific performance from Rennie Santoni. Didn't really have the career that a lot of people expected. He was on the scene with a kind of famous comedy called Enter Laughing, but he's terrific in Dirty Harry. He's cast in Cobra as Cobretti, or Cobra's partner. What's his name? Gonzalez. Now, do we really think that that's not I like to think it's the same guy. I think that even though the character of Gonzalez kind of quits his job in Dirty Harry because he's tired of getting shot at already at a young age, I think it's the same guy. He went back to work, and now instead of being in San Francisco, he's in LA, and now he's Cobretti's partner instead of Dirty Harry Callahan. And the other actor, Andrew Robinson, in Dirty Harry's the killer. He plays the Scorpio killer in Dirty Harry, and in Cobra, he is the guy on the police department, works with Stallone's Marion Cobretti, and he doesn't like him because, stop me if you've heard this before, he doesn't like that Cobretti does a real dirty job. Dirty Harry, he does the jobs no one wants to do. He's on the zombie squad. Like, he's taking care of messes that no other cop wants to get within a million miles of, because they're holding their nose. He's also, not that he's a dirty cop, he's not corrupt, but he's doing every dirty job that comes along. So, Cobra, serial killer film, cop thriller, underdog makes good, little bit of a romance angle with Sly's then wife. It's just not that good, and it kills me to say that because I have seen this movie at least 30 times from start to finish. And in 1996, I wrote my last academic cinema paper in film theory, the most difficult undergraduate course offered at New York University. I did my term paper. It was 90% of my grade. I did it on Cobra, and damned if I didn't get an A in the class because the professor thought I really nailed it. I just made the point that there is no room for anything other than following the conventions of whatever genre this film thinks it is. And I also said how we don't get to learn that much about Harry Callahan and Dirty Harry other than the fact that he's a widower, and he doesn't seem to live anywhere except eat and sleep at police headquarters. We actually get to see Marion Cobretti go home. He's got a nice, is he on the Pacific Palisades? I'm not sure, but he's in a really nice area, and he has a pretty nice apartment. But all he does is work. That's it. That's all he does. All he does is work. And all Harry Callahan does is work. Like, all of these parallels are in there. The problem I have from a story perspective with Cobra is that you set up this gang of serial killers. You have a witness who needs protection in Brigitte Nielsen's character. But rather than tighten the screws and make a very serious, like it could be a manhunt, a double manhunt, where Cobretti is desperately trying to find where this gang, this clan, this New World Order, where is their hideout? Can he stomp out every one of them? And they're on their own manhunt for him. Like, there was the potential for something really good here. Because the early sequences, and there's a terrific scene set in the hospital where Brigitte Nielsen's character, who has been attacked, is recovering, and the killers, they're trying to get to her. And the lead of the NWO is played by a very memorable looking actor who has had a terrific career named Brian Thompson. And I mentioned him on the channel when I did a Best Movie You Never Seen episode on the Steve DeJarnat apocalypse film Miracle Mile, starring Anthony Edwards and Mara Winningham. Really, really underrated, terrific film. But Brian Thompson is kind of the face of the NWO in the world of this movie. And there is a scene set in a hospital that you would say today, well, this could never happen. But it was easier to get through security in the mid-1980s. And it is very taut. And it's the sort of scene that there could have been 3 or 4 more scenes like this in the movie Cobra if they had decided to go in that direction. I don't know why, when Sly wrote the script, I don't understand why he did what he does next. Instead of tightening the screws with Marion Cobretti and the witness, her name is Ingrid Knudsen, that's the character Brigitte Nielsen plays in the movie, instead of them kind of holding up with police support behind them, and let's see who cracks first. It's like, they could be a chess match, in other words. Who's going to go out in the open first? Who's going to take the risk of getting spotted and getting killed? They just randomly decide to drive into the California mountains. And all of the tension, legitimate cinematic tension that's built up in the first act and a half, it all fizzles out. And there are some comedic asides with Stallone and Rennie Santoni, and Rennie does a terrific job here too. It's not as good of a role as Dirty Harry, but he does a really solid job as the partner, bringing out a little bit of the humanity. Brigitte doesn't have much to do other than look amazing, which she does, even with an unflattering haircut. And, the joke was, we talked about this at NYU 3 decades ago, the only reason why her character is even in the film, if we forget that the novel Fair Game, there is a character that is supposed to be her, because Marion Cobretti appears to be, his only love affair is with his assortment of weapons. He doesn't have a social life. And she's in the story in part to show us that he is, in fact, a heterosexual male. This was not also an accident. This is a Reagan era. It's right in the wheelhouse. This is exactly the kind of, testosterone-fueled action. And that's not a criticism either. You look at Predator, you look at Rambo, you look at Cobra. These are the kinds of movies that were playing, not from the political perspective, they were playing with mainstream audiences. And Cobra, given the fact that it's a lousy movie, I don't think it's even at 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. It made money because people wanted to see Stallone. It has the Western ethos. He even, spoiler alert, rides off in the sunset at the end. Are you kidding me? Could we be any more nail meat head? They saw it as an urban Western. Well, Dirty Harry, to some extent, is an urban Western. None of this stuff happens in a vacuum. This is all very straightforward, good guys and bad guys material. And I can't explain why I still love this movie, despite the fact that the last 40 minutes are pretty slack. And Stallone has a machine gun that I don't know that maybe he reloads once. He pumps out hundreds and hundreds of rounds, and he only reloads once. I don't know. The magic gun? Maybe. But Cobra is pure entertainment. You have to kind of check your brain at the door. And if you're looking for any depth, which you get in the original Dirty Harry, and you'll get in the sequel too, because Magnum Force, that's the movie where Harry Callahan seems like the most level-headed guy in the entire San Francisco Police Department. Shooting is okay as long as the right people get shot, he says. And they say, well, we're not doing anything you wouldn't do, Inspector Callahan. We're just hunting out criminals who've evaded the law, and we're putting 5 bullets in them. Yeah, I'm afraid you've misjudged me. That I cannot abide by. And if you guys want to set yourself up as my enemy, good luck. In the immortal words of Liam Neeson in Taken, on the other side of it, Harry Callahan has a certain particular set of skills. It could make him very useful to you, or it's probably going to be the end of you. But Cobra is a movie that I love, and I have seen so many times. You could do a little audience participation with some of the insane lines of dialogue and the way that Brigitte Nielsen, ironically, I don't think that her and Stallone have very good chemistry in this movie. They don't really get together until late, but it is beautifully shot. Los Angeles looks amazing for 40 years ago. And there is some dialogue where you get into the political atmosphere of the era, but you don't really need to pay much attention to that. And it's okay to laugh at how ridiculous, how overwrought, overblown, and absurd this entire story is. And that's it. I mean, this is a guilty pleasure movie. I always recommend people see it. It is a guy movie, as Predator is, but Predator is a fantastic film. Just because it's a guy movie doesn't mean that it is not great cinema. I would count Predator as great cinema. Cobra is a miss. It's a miss, but it is a massively entertaining miss, nevertheless. Cobra, written by Sylvester Stallone from a novel, Fair Game by Paula Gosling, directed by George Pan Cosmatos, and starring Sylvester Stallone, Brigitte Nielsen, Rennie Santoni, and Andrew Robinson. And Brian Thompson. Released on this day, 1986, 39 years ago today. It was a box office hit, and Stallone has frequently discussed how he wished he could have returned to that character, maybe done a sequel. But then again, I would have preferred a sequel to Tango and Cash, if we're being completely honest and fair. This has been episode 517 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Friday, now early afternoon, here with me in New York. And if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.